A UAV circles low, and a single moment of target lock can turn what looks like a routine approach into a chain of events that cannot be reversed. Near Pokrovsk, the space between the lines is no longer something troops can simply rush through, because snow-covered roads, forest edges, and even short pauses can become traces that drones follow and strike. In this kind of war, danger does not arrive in waves. It arrives as continuous pressure, because the side that controls the low-altitude sky decides who gets to move, who must stay down, and who is forced to break apart. So what makes Pokrovsk the place where every assault can pay a heavy price before it even reaches the defensive line? Why does a logistics and transport hub in Donetsk draw such dense UAV activity, turning every road into a life-or-death problem? And when a battle begins in the low-altitude sky, is the outcome still decided by tanks and manpower, or by the ability to keep supply moving and control the approach corridors around Pokrovsk? Stay with military force to break it down. The Russian push toward Pokrovsk starts as a movement problem, because the city sits near routes that feed and rotate units across the Donetsk front. Pokrovsk is treated as a road and rail hub, so convoy routes become strategic. Approach groups begin to slide into the few lanes that still allow armor and infantry to move together. And those lanes matter because they connect staging areas to the edge of the fight. Snow and tree lines shape the path, since vehicles prefer firm tracks and troops follow the cover that breaks up sight lines from the ground. From above, the pattern is clearer, because the same corridors repeat and every slow turn or short halt becomes a marker. Ukraine answers early with a low-altitude UAV screen, and the first drones act like sentries that do not blink. A small aircraft holds a camera over the route, then adjusts as the formation shifts, and that steady watch turns a moving group into coordinates that can be shared. One drone checks the main lane while another scans the shoulders for a second element, and that layered view reduces the chance that a hidden flank move goes unseen. The goal at this stage is not noise, because the goal is certainty, and certainty lets Ukraine decide when the approach stops being a threat. As the Russian element closes, the pressure comes from timing, because being tracked forces decisions before the attackers reach the defensive line. A vehicle that slows to avoid a rut, an infantry file that spreads across a road, or a brief stop near a tree belt can expose the whole group, since each pause creates a fixed point that can be revisited. Once the lead element is identified, the Ukrainian plan is to break the tempo of the push, because tempo is what allows armor, infantry, and support to arrive in one organized shape. When tempo breaks, units detour, spacing changes, and the column loses its rhythm, and those small disruptions can cascade into larger delays. Even without a visible strike, a watched approach tends to compress behind obstacles, and compression makes the route easier to map from the air. Near a logistics node like Pokrovsk, minutes matter, since the attacker needs speed to exploit openings, and the defender needs time to reinforce and keep supply movement alive. This opening phase therefore becomes a contest over corridors, where the side that sees first can force the other side to move slower, wider, and with less confidence. Once the approach has been marked from above, the next phase targets the lead vehicles, because those vehicles set the pace and protect the men moving behind them. The moment the approach is confirmed near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian drone crews shift from watching to stopping, and the 46th Separate Airmobile Brigade is presented as one of the units doing that work. Russian troops push forward with up to 4 armored vehicles, and those vehicles set the pace for everyone behind them, because the lead platform chooses the lane and anchors the timing of the assault. In this phase, a tank at the front is not only protection, it is also direction, since infantry tends to follow its line and rely on it to absorb the first shock. The first minutes become a contest over whether that lead element can keep moving, because movement keeps the attack coherent and keeps the defenders from settling into a firing pattern. Ukrainian operators apply a clear priority order, starting with the tank that leads the rhythm, then the armored fighting vehicles that carry and shield troops, Then, the dismounted infantry moving alongside. That order is practical, because if the armored spine is stopped in the lane, the rest of the formation is forced to react in the open, and reaction is slower than a planned push. A burning lead vehicle can also block a narrow road, and it can turn the protected part of the group into an obstacle that everyone must work around. Reports tied to the episode describe 1 tank and 2 armored vehicles catching fire, while more than 20 Russian soldiers are reported killed and 3 wounded, and the immediate result is a formation that loses its shape on the approach route. Even when these figures are treated as a single event, they show why drones aim at the vehicles first, since disabling a few machines can impose a decision on dozens of people at once. Once armor is hit, coordination begins to unravel, because the original plan assumes that infantry and vehicles can support each other together. If the tank stops, infantry loses a moving shield, and if the carriers stop, troops lose protected transport and a way to evacuate wounded. The problem spreads beyond the wreck itself, because smoke marks the location, debris narrows the road, and the column must choose between halting, reversing, or splitting into smaller packets. This is where command friction grows, since radios fill with requests for direction, squads look for new cover lines, and following vehicles compress in places that were never meant to hold them. Recovery and evacuation become harder, because towing demands time and space, and moving casualties under observation adds urgency that reduces discipline. Every extra minute spent near a burning vehicle also increases exposure, because the site becomes a reference point that can be checked again and again. For the 46th Brigade's UAV teams, the advantage is that pressure can continue while the attackers are still deciding, because drones can loiter, update tracks, and cue follow-on strikes without exposing the crews. This is not only about destroying equipment, it is about forcing the attack to operate without its usual structure, because the lead vehicle normally provides confidence, spacing, and a simple route for everyone to follow. When that structure breaks, the assault becomes a set of smaller moves, and each move has weaker mutual support and fewer safe options to regroup. On constrained ground near Pokrovsk, heavy vehicles turn slowly and infantry must cross exposed gaps to reconnect, so each delay increases risk and drains momentum. Over time, repeated stops like this can change how assaults are planned, because commanders may be pushed towards smaller probes, longer pauses, and wider dispersal, which all reduce the chance of a breakthrough. With the armored backbone damaged and the push forced into scattered groups, the next phase becomes a methodical effort to separate and remove those pieces along snow-lined roads and forest edges. Russian troops do not collapse in one dramatic moment on the Pokrovsk approaches, because the breakdown often starts as a slow drift into scattered pockets. After the first contact, men who expected to advance behind armored cover find themselves on foot, moving along a snow-lined road and the thin forest belts beside it. Snow does not only slow movement, it also narrows choices, because boots and tracks funnel groups toward the same firm ground and the same gaps between trees. What looks like concealment from ground level becomes a pattern from above, since the road edge, the tree line, and the ditch repeat like marks on a map. Men try to use bushes, fence posts, and shell holes as reference points, but these landmarks also guide drones, because they often sit on the terrain that funnels human movement. In many clips, the safest-looking route is the one most used, and that makes it the easiest to predict. The forest belt becomes less a shield and more a corridor. That is why the fight quickly turns into a test of discipline, not bravery, because every extra step in the open creates a clear signature for an observer overhead. UAV strikes exploit that visibility by targeting the simplest actions soldiers must do, such as crossing a gap, stopping to regroup, or kneeling to check a wounded man. Each blast creates fire and shock, and it forces instant choices, since the nearest cover is often shallow and the next move can expose the whole group. Some sprint into the trees, others drop into ditches, and others freeze, because they are unsure whether the drone has left or is circling for a second pass. This is how an assault formation turns into separate problems with no shared timing, because survival pushes squads to act alone instead of as one body. The most damaging effect is spacing failure, since groups that spread too far cannot support each other, while groups that bunch up invite another hit. In winter terrain, that trade-off is harsher, because cover is thin and the white ground makes movement stand out even at distance. When one group is struck, survivors often peel toward the nearest concealment, but that movement draws a line from the air that points to where the rest of the unit is trying to go. If the next group pauses under trees to catch breath, the pause becomes a fixed reference, and fixed references are what drones are built to punish. Fire from burning gear becomes another marker, since smoke and flame highlight the lane and help the next UAV return to the same spot. The cycle repeats, where movement creates exposure, exposure triggers a strike, and the strike produces more chaotic movement. Medical evacuation becomes risky in this pattern because any stretcher carry or vehicle pickup requires a stop that can be seen and timed. Units are forced to choose between speed and care, and that choice erodes cohesion, since leaders lose control of where people go and how long they stay. For commanders, reports become less reliable because radio calls multiply while clear positions vanish, and a map marker cannot show which men can still move. A platoon may still exist on paper, yet it can be broken into fragments that cannot link up without crossing open ground again. The UAV effect does not stop where the formation breaks, because the same pressure is then pushed backward toward the vehicles and the supply rhythm that feed the next attempt. After the spearhead is stopped near Pokrovsk and the assault line breaks into fragments, the fight does not stay at the forward edge because Ukrainian drone teams shift their cameras deeper behind the contact line. In that rear space, targets are not only heavy armor, but also the moving system that feeds the next attempt. Vehicles carrying ammunition, fuel, water, batteries, and medical gear must still travel the same roads, and reserve squads still need holding points where they can be counted and redirected. Command vans, radio relays, and engineering trucks also matter because they keep units aligned when pressure forces dispersion. When these support pieces are disrupted, the front line feels it as silence, delays, and missed timing. Each of those movements leaves a trace, and drones treat traces as the start of a track. A sighting can be enough to cue repeated checks because traffic tends to return to the safe lane. Precision strikes in depth focus on mobility and timing, because a delayed delivery can matter as much as a destroyed vehicle. A truck that turns off a main track, a carrier that pauses under a tree belt, or a cluster that forms near a farmhouse can reveal a temporary transfer point. These places are not permanent bases, yet they repeat because they sit near junctions, cover lines, or the last protected spot before an exposed lane. Once identified, they become nodes in a chain, and drones return to the same corridor to keep the rear area feeling like the front. The goal is to force Russian units to move in shorter bursts, then to spend more minutes waiting, listening, and confirming routes. Some units respond by spreading out and sending single vehicles, but that increases the number of trips and raises the chance that one loss cancels the whole run. Other units try to shift traffic onto rough side tracks, but those tracks slow loads and raise breakdown risk. Others push repairs closer to the line, but repair sites need tools, spare parts, and fuel, so they create new fixed locations. Even a successful repair can become a problem if the repaired vehicle must rejoin a congested lane. When vehicles are hit behind the front, Russian commanders are forced to spend manpower on protection rather than momentum. More soldiers are assigned to guard roads, escort convoys, and watch staging points, while more time is spent on route checks and spacing. Those measures slow the flow forward, and slow flow forces frontline units to ration ammunition, delay recovery, and hold positions with fewer reserves. The pressure also changes the order of operations because units may wait for fuel before they move, or move before they are fully supplied. That trade-off produces smaller attacks and more frequent pauses, which makes the campaign feel heavier and less predictable. This is why the battle becomes a hunt across linked targets, where pressure continues even when trenches are quiet. A push that fails at the edge does not simply reset, because the rear system is now stressed and rebuilding it consumes vehicles and hours. When daylight routes are watched and struck in sequence, the next question is whether darkness can still offer a usable window for regrouping. Night used to be a planning window near Pokrovsk, because darkness reduced the chance that a moving group would be seen before it reached cover. That assumption is fading, because UAV teams now combine night vision with thermal imaging, so the ground stays readable even when the sky looks empty. A thermal sensor does not need light, and it does not care about fabric patterns, because it looks for heat contrast and the outline of a body against colder terrain. In winter, that contrast can be strong since snow and frozen soil usually hold less heat than a person, an engine, or recently handled equipment. Even positions that feel hidden can show a glow when troops breathe hard, weapons warm, or a vehicle idles for only a short time. Operators also pair thermal feeds with map cues and radio intercepts, so a faint signature can be confirmed very fast. Light drones can rotate in relays, which keeps coverage steady while batteries are swapped, and it limits the gaps attackers once depended on. Russian infantry groups have tried to adapt by moving slower, hugging tree belts, and wearing insulating layers to soften their signature, yet these steps rarely remove it. Exertion, breath, and contact with cold surfaces still create small signals, and a loitering drone can catch the moment a group pauses to rest or confirm direction. This turns night into a one-way window, because the observer can build a track over minutes while the men below do not know when they were first detected. The most dangerous moment is often the halt, since a halt creates a fixed point that can be checked again and timed for a strike. A short regroup near a tree line, a huddle around a wounded man, or a vehicle stopping to turn becomes visible through thermal optics, and that visibility forces movement before order is restored. The pressure is not only physical loss, it is decision pressure, because leaders must choose between pushing tired men forward or risking another stop under watch. Medical evacuation becomes harder, since carrying casualties requires time and coordination, and those needs clash with the demand to keep moving. Units that would normally consolidate after dark often split into smaller elements, because smaller clusters feel safer, yet smaller clusters struggle to share ammunition, radios, and a common route. Over hours, that pattern erodes discipline and confidence, because soldiers learn that silence and darkness no longer mean safety, and that expectation carries into the next day. This is why night operations now extend the daytime contest instead of resetting it, and it is why a drone screen can deny an attacker the clean pause needed to rebuild a coherent assault group. When both day and night are controlled from above, the biggest result is not one strike, but the loss of Russia's ability to concentrate forces long enough to hold ground or mount a fresh push. Around Pokrovsk, the battle is shaped by a constant trade-off, because an assault needs enough mass to move with confidence, yet mass is easier to spot from the air. When Russian units gather to receive orders, refuel, or line up for a push, the act of organizing creates a clear pattern on roads and field edges. Drone observers do not need a perfect view, since repeated movement in the same corridor is enough to build a track and predict the next halt. Commanders face hard choices because tighter control improves coordination, but tighter control also concentrates people and vehicles into a single point of risk. The result is a push that struggles to stay coherent, since units either disperse and lose timing or stay compact and accept higher exposure. This pressure is about tempo, because the side that interrupts the approach rhythm can decide when contact happens and on what terms. While this low-altitude contest continues at the front, Russia also strikes Ukrainian cities with drones and missiles, keeping civilian systems under stress during winter. In Kyiv, officials have reported damage to homes and public facilities, and many residents have faced interruptions to heating and basic services after major overnight attacks. These strikes force a different kind of tempo control, because repair crews must restore power and heat quickly, and emergency services must stay ready for repeated waves. The link between Pokrovsk and Kiev is that both battles are fought on the clock, since delays cascade into larger problems, whether that is a stalled assault lane or a cold apartment block. This dual pressure shapes national choices because air defenses, engineering units, and transport assets must support both the front and the rear at the same time. That competition matters, since protection of cities helps protect logistics, and protection of logistics helps keep frontline units supplied. For policymakers, this means budgets, production, and air defense allocation become as decisive as tactical skill on the ground. In this environment, control of the low-altitude sky becomes decisive for daily operations because it governs how forces move, regroup, and attempt coordinated action. When the rhythm is set by cheap systems that fly low and appear in large numbers, the core question shifts from who owns more heavy equipment to who can keep that low-altitude advantage longer. The fighting around Pokrovsk shows that low-altitude UAV control now sets the pace of ground war, because it decides when units can move, assemble, and stay supplied. When both daylight and darkness are monitored, tactics built on concealment lose reliability, and commanders must plan as if every pause can be observed. This drives adaptation toward counter-UAV measures, including electronic warfare, point defense, and stricter movement discipline, because endurance matters as much as firepower. The wider picture is strategic. Tactical drones strain frontline movement, while long-range strikes pressure cities and infrastructure, and both compete for air defense resources, repair capacity, and transport. Advantage goes to the side that protects its supply chain, sustains production, and keeps decision cycles short under surveillance. Pokrovsk is more than one battleground, since it signals how future battles will be timed and controlled from the low sky. This reality will shape choices ahead. Subscribe to Military Force for clear, fact-based battlefield analysis that explains the tactics, the politics, and the human cost in the same frame. If this episode helped you understand how war works, share it with someone who cares about peace, because education is the first step towards stopping escalation. And keep the discussion respectful in the comments, because the goal here is understanding that supports diplomacy, civilian protection, and real paths to peace.